Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stephanie Ann again. I am your host, Stephanie, and I am here to talk about all things deconstruction, religious trauma, psychedelics, Jungian psychology, spiritual crisis, and basically just my process of discovering who I am again after a lifetime in Mormonism. I tend to be a very uncurated person, and so much of this podcast will be stream of consciousness style, where I share personal stories and experiences with the aim of creating personal, human-to-human connection rather than just sharing information. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and jump in. All right, I feel like my voice is maybe going to sound a little bit raspy because I've been crying all day long. Sometimes I feel like crying is such a gift. Like when I have a day where I can just be alone and I don't have to do anything, which this does not happen very often, it feels like all of my grief will just come to the surface and I will just cry and cry and cry and cry. And it's not necessarily enjoyable. I don't prefer it, I would say, but it feels very honest, and in a strange way, it feels very nurturing. So today, I want to kind of dive into this a little bit. I want to talk about grief and loss and how much of my life has kind of been unconsciously organized around avoiding this. And we hear a lot in the world of therapy and inner work and spirituality, the importance of grieving. But I think often, at least for me, I can cry and cry and cry, but I'm not necessarily grieving deep enough. There's a quality to your grief that changes a bit once you reach enough depth in it, where it really starts to become something different. And the reason that all of this is coming up for me right now is because I recently visited a friend who lives in Connecticut. And I want to tell you about my trip out there because it was strangely life-changing in a way that I was not expecting. And it was somehow very confronting and bringing up a lot of this grief and loss that I haven't really been feeling deep enough. So this friend, I was actually a client of hers back in, I don't know, it's been a couple years now. And I found her through like a friend of a friend, and she like helps people through their spiritual awakening process. But like that can be kind of vague. And even when I was working with her, I was like, didn't know quite exactly what she was doing, but it was helpful. I was like, she's helping me, but I don't know that I understand or know or see all of the things that she does. It was kind of like a therapeutic container, but not really. Anyway, she was super helpful. And I really liked the advice that she gave and the perspectives that she had. And so I just kind of stayed in touch with her over the last couple of years. And I worked with her partner for a little while too at one point, where he's in a similar line of work, but he focuses a little bit more like on the therapeutic side of it, like doing trauma therapy and inner child work and stuff like that. And so I worked with him for a little while as well. And they were both just really wise, refreshing, grounding individuals for me. And it felt kind of like having a little anchor point of like spiritual community somewhere in the world, which was really helpful for me because I had just lost all of my community when I left Mormonism. So I had been trying to get out to see them for the last couple of years, and it finally lined up, and I went out to see them a couple of weeks ago. And I thought that I was just going on a vacation. I was like, I'm gonna just take a little break from my life, do something for myself, which it was, but it was not at all what I was expecting. And when I entered their home and spent the weekend with them, it was almost like I was on a meditation retreat, but I wasn't on a meditation retreat. I was just hanging out with them in their house. And the experience itself is going to be difficult to put into words because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. Like the first thing that happened when I got there was I started having nightmares. The type of nightmares that I hadn't had since after I did psychedelics. And it's very common, I mean, especially for me, but I think for a lot of people, after you have a really big expansion, like psychedelics, you then afterwards have contraction. And so I had a lot of expansion on psychedelics, and then I had a lot of contraction, a lot of nightmares, a lot of shadow stuff. And now suddenly I was having those types of nightmares again. Like the first night I was there, I was having all of these nightmares. And I woke up and I was like, this is weird. This feels just like it felt after I did psychedelics. And I haven't felt this in quite some time. And so I spent some time with them over the weekend. They live a very calm, simple life that's really beautiful. It was, a lot of like, let's cook our breakfast and then let's chat and then let's go on a walk and then let's cook our lunch and then we'll chat some more and then we'll go see the chickens and then we'll go on another walk and then we'll cook dinner and like let's have a good philosophical discussion. Or we can very easily flow from like casual, everyday, normal stuff to all of a sudden we're talking about very deep spiritual topics, which was very nourishing for me because it's been hard for me to find people who I feel like I share resonance with in that regard. But the whole time I was spending time with them, where we were just hanging out, we weren't really even doing anything in particular per se, I was having this internal experience of what I can only describe as coming into contact with the direct experience of non-duality. I don't even know if that's the right way to say that, if that's how I would describe that. But I'll tell you a story to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. One thing I recognized when I was there that I didn't know was something that I do, that is a pattern that I have had for my whole life that I couldn't see until now, is I was attuning to each of the people there to try to find their shadow. Meaning, as I was there, I was recognizing, it was almost as if I was looking at them through the eyes of my 3-year-old self. It was very weird. I've never had anything like this before. I kept seeing them through the eyes of my 3-year-old. Like I felt like my 3-year-old self was looking out of my eyeballs. And she was looking at all of them, and she was trying to attune to them to find their shadow, find their unconscious, find where is their shame, what are they insecure about, what are they afraid of, so that I could then attune to that and become the good girl who then tends to that, who says what they want to hear, who caters to that pain in them, who says everything that needs to be said in order to make them feel good. Like I said, I had no idea I was doing this until it suddenly became very clear that I had been doing this for my whole life. It was like a survival mechanism, a way to like attune to my environment to give what was needed so that I could then be loved. How can I be what these people want me to be? And the reason that I recognized that this was happening is because as I was like trying to attune to my friend Dara, the one that I'm talking about, it was like there was nothing there. And if you really pay attention, when you're trying to like orient to someone, you can always feel something there, whether it's like their shadow material or like their personality or whatever it is. It's like you can feel some sort of substance. But when I was going to like attune to her, it felt like nothingness, but not in the way that we would traditionally think of nothingness, because nothingness kind of has like some negative connotations with it. It kind of feels like empty or like a void or maybe like lacking emotion or robotic or detached or alien, disconnected, stuff like that. But even those things are something. And if someone is that way, or embodying those qualities, you would feel it. You can feel when someone is detached. You can feel when someone is cold or emotionless or robotic. But with her, it just felt like nothing. It felt clear. And in all of the time that I had been working with her as a client and her partner, they were always talking about the importance of having a clear mirror. Like, we need clear mirrors in our lives. And I kind of knew what that meant, but I wasn't quite sure what it meant at the same time. And to just quickly cover the concept of what it means to like be a mirror for someone. This is very common in Jungian psychology as well, where the idea is that in our relationships, or even just in the situations in our lives, they will mirror back to us ourselves. And when I first learned this, I thought it meant like, oh, if that person over there is being abusive, that means that I'm also abusive. No. What it means is they will mirror back to you how you are an energetic match. So, for example, if you're in a relationship with someone who is abusive, what are they showing you about yourself? They are mirroring to you, showing you all the ways that you are willing to tolerate abuse. They will mirror back to you your own disempowerment, your own shame, everything that is in you that is causing you to stay in this abusive relationship, that is causing you to allow yourself to tolerate this type of treatment. And the idea, at least in Jungian psychology, is that essentially the unconscious, like the shadow, it wants to be illuminated. It wants to be seen. So your shadow is like everything that you've repressed, everything that you're defending yourself against, that you're protecting yourself against inside of you, that you don't want to see yourself and that you don't want other people to see. But one thing that Dara said that I loved is that from a non-dual perspective, the shadow is actually unrecognized innocence. But regardless, the idea is that we will attract people and situations into our lives in an attempt to illuminate the shadow. So if you use your situations that you're in and the relationships that you're in this way, they can be a direct mirror for what is in your shadow. And then you can integrate it and work with it and further individuate so that you no longer are in like energetic resonance with those types of people or situations anymore. So ultimately, instead of constantly looking out there at what has happened to us or what the other person is doing, not to dismiss or invalidate victimization, but instead of looking out there constantly, you turn the focus inward and use the situation to illuminate your own shadow, which will ultimately lead to more and more of your own liberation. Because if the shadow is illuminated, there's nothing in there to trigger. There's nothing unconscious that's trying to be seen. So this is like a really brief definition of how I would define what it means to be a mirror for someone. So when someone talks about being a clear mirror, basically what it means is someone who can reflect back to you who you are or what's in your shadow in a way that their own stuff is not getting involved. Because there's a difference between like, oh, I'm going to be a clear mirror for you and, oh, I'm just going to tell you my opinion about you. And that's 90% of the time what people are doing. They're like, I can see this thing in you and it's this, and you need to change this and do this. And really, it's just like we're just spewing our opinions about each other at each other because we have not yet addressed our own shadow. We have not yet addressed how we are projecting onto them or what of our own stuff we are putting onto them that we can't see. So a clear mirror is basically someone who can reflect back to you without any of that getting in the way. There's nothing shadowy happening. And if shadow stuff is coming up for them, which is more often the case that two imperfect people, obviously, with shadow stuff are going to be in relationship. So if shadow stuff is coming up for both parties, they have had enough practice and can have enough self-responsibility and accountability to recognize what their shadow stuff feels like and when they're projecting, when they're not, and are willing to be in open, curious exploration together about what each person or the relationship is mirroring back to each other. I don't know if this all sounds really abstract and confusing, but for anyone who has engaged in any type of inner work process, you really do begin to see that in your interpersonal relationships, if you use them in the right way to self-reflect, you will see that they are pointing you back to yourself. And this isn't like in the weird codependent way where Mormons can often fall into, where it's like, oh, let me make everything my own fault so that I can then fix the situation to then keep the peace. It's different than that. Because that itself is its own type of shadow material that needs to be seen and illuminated. And I'm also not talking about like collective and systemic harm. I'm talking more so just about your interpersonal relationships. So going back to my experience with Dara, I was trying to orient to her. I was trying to feel like, what's there? Not in like a judgmental way, more of like a skeptical way. Because we all know, coming from a cult, coming from a lifetime of being manipulated, I'm not someone who's just like, let me just trust what this person's saying to me, you know? I'm very much living in the space of like my radars are up. So I'm like trying to feel into her. Like, where's the ego? Where's her shame? Where's her, like, where's anything? Where's anything in there? And it just felt clear. It almost felt as if she had no shadow. And that sounds crazy to say, but like in her own words, she talks about how the shadow is finite. It's not just endless and endless and endless. It's something that can be fully illuminated. And what it felt like when I say that she had no shadow, it felt like there wasn't anything that she was defending herself against. I could have said something to her that was very true. Like, Dara, this is this blind spot that you have. I can see it in you, and I could be very direct and like harsh about it. And there would be no charge, there would be no defense. She didn't have to hold up this idea of herself as being somehow grandiose. There was nothing about herself that she was trying to protect herself or other people from. And this is what they often talk about in Buddhism, is this idea of like, you know, when you sit at the feet of a guru, you are just changed by being in their presence, right? And I'm not saying that Dara's a guru. She would probably laugh at that. It's not like she was teaching me anything or like, you know, preaching any sort of truths to me. We were just hanging out. But the concept is the same. It's kind of like when someone has gone through a process where they have recognized absolute truth, the absolute truth in their own being, through their own spiritual process, it's like a recognition in them that comes online and an embodiment that then when you are around them, it's almost like a popcorn effect. And your system starts to recognize and remember the same thing. It's kind of like that image. Have you guys ever seen that image where it's like the universe is like this little man and he's sitting underneath the earth, like he's sitting below the ground, and he's sticking up his 5 fingers up through the soil. And all 5 of the fingers are like 5 different individuals. But then underneath the surface, it's all the same universe, right? It's all one. So when you're around someone who has recognized absolute truth in themselves, something in you is also like, oh, I am also that thing. I also embody that. And it was interesting because I was talking to a friend about this experience and he asked if it felt like projection, meaning, did it feel like I was just seeing something in her that I had not yet embodied, you know? And I was like thinking that I was getting this thing from her, this like enlightenment or something. And it was like, not really, because it didn't feel like something was coming from her. It felt more like I was in the direct experience of something happening inside of myself. So this is kind of what was happening when I was hanging out at their house. But it was a very interesting experience because you would think that if you're coming into contact with something in you that is remembering or recognizing the truth of your wholeness, that you would just be like, oh, what a relief, you know? It almost felt like there was a part of me that recognized that like none of my problems were real, but not in like a bypassy way, in a very embodied way, which felt very disorienting. You would think the ego would be like, this feels great. I'd love to know the truth of my wholeness. But it was like I was simultaneously feeling this touching of wholeness and then this fear of it. And I read something the other day that was talking about how the ego's only purpose is to maintain its belief in separateness. And that's like, maybe this is all semantics. There's many different ways to define the ego, but I loved this definition because it really simplified things. And it was like, okay, well, yeah, of course, if you're touching wholeness, that is going to obliterate the ego's only purpose, which is to maintain the belief that it is separate. So this is why I was like having nightmares. This is why when I was there, it was really very profound, but it was also very confronting. When you're in a space where there's such a clear mirror, it's like you go to either project onto them or like to have them project back onto you, or to like you try to find somewhere to hide. We do this all the time with each other and we don't realize we're doing it. We're hiding with each other and in each other. Like, I'll protect your ego, you protect mine. I'm going to hide here in this belief that I'm a victim of this thing, and you're going to validate that for me. I'm going to be in a space of lack, and you're going to reflect that back to me. We're like doing this unconscious dance with each other where we're just hiding from ourselves. But when you're with somebody who is a clear mirror, there is nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to go. The only thing that happens is you get reflected back to yourself. It's like a direct confrontation with your ego. And everything that's shadowy in you begins to be illuminated. This is why the process of spiritual awakening is not about love and light and feeling good and like chasing peak experiences. So many people avoid real spiritual development because it's fucking terrifying. It's like the obliteration of every part of you that you thought made you you. And it's coming into contact with your deepest, darkest pains and secrets. Because in order to access the wholeness that is in you, all of that stuff has to burn away. And it is a fiery process. So I'm having these nightmares while I'm there. And I'm also having all of this other stuff come up while I was there, and then it's continued after I've come home. And like I mentioned, it was very similar to the process I went through when I did psychedelics. And after I experienced everything that I did on psychedelics and I had the massive contraction in my system, all of it was surrounding death, which I have spoken to in one of my other episodes. I was speaking to a friend recently, a dear friend who has felt like another sort of anchor point of spiritual community for me. And he was mentioning that one of his teachers made the comment that behind everyone's neuroses, at the core, there is one of two fears: the fear of death or the fear of madness. And anyone who has gone very deep in their inner process, you get to the point where you realize that we're all the same. At the core of everyone, it's not that different. You got like maybe a couple different options for like what your core wounds are, but it's basically all like fear and shame. And for me, this has very much been true, that everything in my life has circled around the fear of death. And this is why it came up so strongly after I did psychedelics, and now it was coming up again. And mind you, at the same time, I'm having to get on an airplane, which I never used to be scared of flying. Before I went through my crazy spiritual crisis with psychedelics, I flew everywhere. We flew all over the world. And I was just like, this is fine. I remember one time we were flying home from Portugal. And in between Portugal and the US, there's like one tiny island. And it's called the Azores. The Azores or the Azores? Azores? How do you say that? I don't know. We were flying back halfway across the ocean. And the pilot's like, hey, like, one of our generators went out. We're just going to see what happens. Or, I don't know, something probably not that scary sounding, something a little more professional. And then like 30 minutes later, yeah, like one of our backup generator just went out. And the plane was losing its mind. And I was just like, why are y'all freaking out? Like, we're going to be fine. And it's probably because I was Mormon at the time and I legitimately believed that Jesus was going to protect me from being injured. And everyone was like having panic attacks, and like we had to emergency land on this little tiny island in the middle of the ocean, which was phenomenal. The most beautiful place I've ever been to this day. And we had to spend 24 hours there until our next plane came. All that to say, I never used to be afraid of flying, but now, for whatever reason, well, I know why. It's because this fear of death has like overcome my psyche. This neuroses has been so amplified in the last 4 years because it wants me to look at it and process it. I've become terrified of flying. Like every time I get on a plane, I'm like, I am walking into a metal coffin. I am suffocating in here. Like, what's going to go wrong? Okay, is the pilot going to mess something up? Is someone going to go crazy on the plane and do something insane? Is there going to be a malfunction with the plane? Is the weather going to fuck things up? Are we going to hit something? Is air traffic control going to be working with all the weird shit that's happening with the government right now? And so the entire flight, there and back, I'm just preparing for my death. I can laugh now, but it literally will take me. Like, I got to connect with my ancestors. I am like in the darkest place where I'm like, and then on one of my flights, I didn't have Wi-Fi because the plane was like 100 years old. And I was just raw dogging it. And I was like, oh my God, I really got to tap into my higher power here because I'm about to die. And then on top of all of that, I was also going through some health stuff where they essentially wanted to test me for a few different types of cancer because of some symptoms that I was having. And anybody who has experienced that knows that that's like waiting for news from the doctor, getting bad news from the doctor, going in for your tests, all that is so triggering. And so this was all happening at the same time. So I have this fear of death that's coming up and like being brought to my attention again when I'm out in Connecticut. And then I have all this stuff in my real life that's just making me like look at it directly. And I started listening to the book Who Dies by Stephen Levine. If you guys have not read that, I highly recommend. It's phenomenal. And everything in there is just speaking my language. But he made a comment at one point about how when it comes to death or loss or grief, it's less about what we are grieving or what we have lost, and it's more about the fear of loss itself. It's the place of loss itself that we try so vehemently to avoid. And as I sat with this and I was thinking about it, I have fear around death, but there's also, coupled with that, this extreme fear of loss. And the fear of death and the fear of loss were kind of the same thing for me. It wasn't so much that I was super afraid of what was going to happen to me after I died, because, it's like, I don't know, I've listened to enough NDE stories to be like, yeah, it's probably fine. But there's so much loss associated with death. Obviously, it's the ending of something. It's the direct confrontation with impermanence. And as I examined this fear of death, I realized that most of it really did come down to this huge fear of loss. It doesn't matter what shape it takes. It could be the loss of income, the loss of a relationship, the loss of health, the loss of your sanity, the loss of innocence, all forms of loss. All of it just came back to this place, the place of loss itself. And in his book, he talks about how grief and loss, they're like a threshold, and that when you experience profound loss and profound grief, it becomes so big that you can no longer maintain any semblance of like a separate self. Because the only way to hold the pain that big is to open, because if you contract around it, it will destroy you, like you will shatter. And you really shatter either way, but it's more so, are you shattering open or are you shattering into bitterness and hate? But either way, the experience is so intense that it takes you beyond yourself. It takes you into an altered state, into a new way of being. And if you allow the threshold, if you allow yourself to cross it and to no longer do everything you can to defend yourself against grief, to defend yourself against loss, it becomes a doorway to your liberation. And part of me even just hates saying this because it partially triggers my Mormon trauma, where it's like, everything happens for a reason. And like, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. It's like, ugh, spare me. And I hate the idea of like attaching some sort of spiritual purpose to suffering, because I think sometimes that can kind of glorify suffering, or we can fall into like worshiping our suffering. And I think a lot of suffering is just like completely and totally unnecessary, especially on like a collective and systemic level. It's like, I don't look at what's happening in the world and think like, this is going to open them to their greatest form of love. I mostly just think like, good God, what the hell are we doing here? But I just know from my own personal experience that immense grief has the potential to expand you to immense love. And this is so much easier said than done, because what is being asked when we are grieving something like death, or the loss of our own safety, or the loss of something so vital to being human, what is being asked is so massive. It does kill the ego. And there's something that I've noticed that happens in myself when I stop resisting loss and resisting change. And it feels almost like there's a ground there. Like you think there's going to be annihilation, but when you finally stop resisting, you find a sense of ground. And it's almost as if you've been hovering above that for your whole life. And I, for the longest time, and even still, struggle with this because it's easy to say that, not from personal experience. It's easy to look at suffering and be like, allow this to open you. And there's still so much like bitterness and resentment and anger at the suffering that people experience. But even in all of my bitterness, the process that I've been in has forced me to consider something else. It's not that I'm like trying to be holy and be like, let me have this pain open me. I would much rather not. I would love to spiritually bypass all of that shit. I don't want to find, I'm not looking for beauty in this, you know? But there's something about the process that has forced me deeper and deeper and deeper into myself to a place that I would not have ever accessed otherwise. And the deeper I've gone, the more I have found my connection to wholeness and have found liberation. One thing that Dara said that I really loved when I was out there is that she was talking about how the body itself also wants to return to wholeness, which I really loved because a lot of people who are non-dual, it can be very like bypassy, right? It's kind of like the body's not real, like disregard the body. Everything is an illusion. And it's like spirit somehow matters more than physical form. And that has never resonated for me. I have always felt like there's something very, very sacred about having a body and being a human and about like physical matter itself. And I even remember one time, I can't remember if I shared this story with you guys or not on a different episode, but I remember when I was like 15 or maybe 16 or 17, I was at EFY, which is like church camp for nerds, the nerdiest of Mormon nerds. And we were in a fireside and I was like really feeling the spirit. I was like really in tune, whatever. And I had this like brief out of body experience where I could see my body, but I like wasn't in it. And I remember thinking, I can't wait to get a body. And I was like longing for a body. So there's something about my particular soul or my karma or whatever it is that I really find sacredness in the human experience and in physical matter itself. And the reason that I mention this is because you cannot go deeply into being human, into yourself, without encountering your pain. The metaphor that he gives in the book that I'm reading is like you spend your whole life, like imagine you're a tree, you spend your whole life focusing on the leaves and the branches and the flowers, and you do all of this work to kind of like make the tree look really nice and pretty and the pruning and the whatever, never taking the time to go beneath to the roots to see where you spring from. Where are you coming from? And those roots, those depths include immense amounts of grief. It's simply part of being human. Our own grief, our collective grief, our ancestral grief, the grief of the earth itself. I've heard people talk about their experiences on ayahuasca where they experienced the grief of the earth and how it was absolutely life-changing in a way that they could never forget. When we are in physical form in these bodies, we are, whether we like it or not, connected to that grief. But if you can have the courage to go over the threshold, even deeper, you will find, like Dara said, unrecognized innocence. You will find unrecognized wholeness. And I speak to this partially from personal experience, but partially just in theory, because I have not embodied it as fully as I know is possible. And it's still a process that I am very much in. It's a practice. It's a practice. And one of the things that I've thought about often in my life is, what is it that I actually want from this life? If I get to the end of it, what do I want to be able to say? And it's really just that I want to be able to really deeply give and receive love. Like, have you ever looked around at the people in your life or the earth itself or whatever it might be and felt like you know that you're capable of loving it more? And not in the Mormon-y way that's like, I'm going to be really nice and caretakey of everyone else's egos so that they can feel good about themselves, and then I'm going to call that love through self-abandonment and self-sacrifice. but in the real way, where it's like, you are capable of feeling a deeper sense of love, but you don't quite know how to access it or where it is or how to feel it. It's almost as if you're capable of just feeling more in general. And I think this happens the deeper we go into ourselves, into our grief, and therefore into our own embodiment. And the process is relentless. It's like it will ask you again and again and again to surrender and to trust and to open over and over and over. I was talking to my ex-husband recently. Him and I are still really good friends. And we were talking about some things from the past, from the divorce. We had a very charged divorce. And we were just talking about a few things. And he was like, does talking about all of this make you hate me again? And I was like, hate is pretend. I feel like the emotion of hate is pretend. I think hate is just really sad love. And throughout the whole divorce, as charged as it was, I kept trying to tell myself that I hated him, and I know he was probably doing the same with me, and it always felt like a lie. And this is just me. I know that most people who are divorced are not this way, but this was just our story in particular. And I have found that with all of the people that I have truly loved in my life, whether it be partners or friends or family, if I try to convince myself that I hate them, underneath that, it's just really sad love. It's grief. We're so afraid of our pain. I remember I went to a grief ritual a couple years ago, and there was this sharing circle. There was maybe like 40 people there, and everyone was sharing their stories of why they were there grieving. And it was like, wow, like the stuff that people go through. And many people said that they were afraid that their grief would destroy them, that their grief would kill them. They were afraid to feel it. And I was included in that. And the process of the grief ritual itself allows you to go really deep into your grief. And I did it. I went into my grief, and I didn't die. I lived. And I came out from that experience more connected to myself and to everyone there. I honestly feel like sometimes it's easier to close. It's easier to be bitter and resentful and angry. It feels less vulnerable, but ultimately, even though I would rather just permanently remain defended and armored, my process has relentlessly attempted to take me over the threshold of grief again and again and again, so that I can access a truer truth inside of me, deeper than my rage and my resentment and my bitterness. So that is the experience of how I thought I was going on vacation. I ended up entering another dimension through a portal, apparently, and contacted non-duality in such a way that I was directly confronted with my ego and have been swimming in my deepest, darkest pains ever since. I honestly don't know how we do it. Like, I look at the things that human beings go through and come out of, and then make the conscious choice to not perpetuate that harm and to use those experiences to try and better the world is truly awe-inspiring to me. My favorite type of content on Instagram is the stuff where people have gone through something terrible, or they are currently going through something terrible, and they are using that to spread love or joy or to inspire people. I see content like that, and I become your stereotypical 65-year-old mom who is just crying at even the most small things that are sentimental. It's like you can't go to the movies with your mom because she'll cry at every single scene. I have become that person. And I just love seeing the ways that people are continually trying to spread love and beauty, even though we've all been through so much. There's this account that I follow where this guy just goes around and like gives old people flowers. And I cry every time because these old people are just so happy to receive flowers. Or there's accounts that I follow too where they're like currently actively going through something really difficult, like an illness or a loss. And they're sharing either their memories or beautiful moments or whatever it might be to take the situation and alchemize it and turn it into something really touching. I'll just get lost. I'll get lost in Instagram content like that, and before I know it, I'm just sobbing my eyes out alone in my bed before I go to sleep. I always feel like I need to end these in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. It's the only way I know how to end something like this. Go on Instagram and watch this guy give old people flowers. I'm also going to link to Dara in the description of the episode to her website in case anybody wants to see what sort of offerings she has. I'm sure there's a few people there that are like, what? Who is this person? So I will link to her if you are wanting to look into that. And you can always find me under Stephanie Ann again on Instagram or on TikTok. Thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time.